All right. So have you ever, really thought about where your fish comes from? You know, when you're at the store and it says sustainably farmed,
Right, right.
we're diving into that today. We're looking at aquaculture hatchery workers. And our main source for this deep dive is going to be RoleCatcher's career guide on this.
Yeah, it's such an important job, and I feel like most people don't know much about it.
It's like we always talk about sustainable seafood, but someone's got to make that happen. And that's what I think is so cool about these deep dives we get to, like really unpack these jobs we might not even know exist. So whether you're thinking about a career change or just, curious about the world, stick with us. You might be surprised what you learn.
For sure. And even if fish farming isn't your thing, understanding aquaculture is crucial for like everyone. It's about the future of food, the environment, the whole shebang.
Exactly. So no matter what, this deep dive is going to be relevant to you. Okay, so let's get into it. The RoleCatcher Guide goes super in depth on what an aquaculture hatchery worker actually does. I'll be honest, at first I pictured someone like just casually tossing fish food into a giant tank, but it's way more involved than that.
Oh yeah, way more. It's not just tossing food. It's like maintaining this whole delicate balance,
Mm-hmm.
From the moment those little fish eggs hatch, they're responsible for creating the perfect environment.
Okay, so walk me through it. What's a typical day like for an aquaculture hatchery worker? What are some of the things they're doing?
So first off, water quality. They are on top of that like you wouldn't believe. We're talking constantly checking pH levels, temperature, oxygen, making sure it's perfect for the fish.
So it's like a constant balancing act.
Totally. And then, of course, there's feeding.
Right.
But it's not just like sprinkling some flakes in there. They're basically fish nutritionists, figuring out exactly what each species needs at each stage of growth.
Wow, so they're not just feeding fish, they're like nurturing a whole ecosystem from the ground up.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible when you think about it.
And it's not just like the feeding, right? This RoleCatcher guide also talks about disease prevention, which sounds super important.
Well, it's huge. That's where biosecurity comes in. Aquaculture hatchery workers are like the frontline defense against any kind of outbreak, because that could wipe out a whole bunch of fish.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what kind of stuff are they doing for that?
Well, they have to be like sterilization ninjas, making sure all the equipment is totally clean.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they bring in any new fish, they got to quarantine them and just always be on the lookout for any signs of sickness.
So they're like fish doctors too. I never would have thought of that. How can you even tell if a fish is sick?
It's all about being observant, really paying attention. They're trained to spot the tiniest things, like if a fish is acting weird, not eating as much, even if its color is a little off.
Wow, that's some serious attention to detail. I guess, like you were saying earlier, it's about maintaining that whole balance.
Exactly. And it's not just about the hands-on stuff either. Remember all that data they're collecting? Water quality, feeding schedules, all that. They have to analyze all that too to make sure things are running smoothly and spot any potential problems.
So, wait, hold on. They're like data analysts on top of everything else?
Yeah.
These aquaculture hatchery workers are like multi-talented.
They kind of have to be. It's a demanding job, but it's also really rewarding. And, the role catcher guy goes into career progression too, which is interesting.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about that. So, where would someone even start in a field like this? And like, what would it take to, say, become a supervisor?
Well, a lot of people start as trainees, just learning the ropes from the more experienced workers,
Mhm.
feeding, cleaning, monitoring the water, all that basic stuff.
Makes sense. So they kind of work their way up.
Yeah, exactly. As they get more experience, they can take on more responsibility.
Hmm.
Like they might start managing a specific area of the hatchery or even supervising a team of trainees. And then, eventually they could become a supervisor themselves.
So there's definitely room to grow in this field.
Oh, for sure. And as you move up,
Mhm.
those analytical skills, the problem solving, all that becomes even more important. Like, imagine being a hatchery supervisor, overseeing this whole operation, managing budgets, making these big decisions that impact like the entire hatchery. It's a lot of pressure.
That's a far cry from what I was picturing at the beginning. It sounds like a really impactful career path.
It totally is. And the cool thing is, with aquaculture growing so fast, the demand for these skilled workers at all levels is only going to keep increasing.
It's kind of crazy how much goes into getting that fish to our plate, isn't it? I'm definitely looking at those labels differently now.
It's all connected, what we choose to buy, how it's produced, the whole thing.
Hmm.
Speaking of connections, that role catcher guide has some good stuff about interviews, which can be a little nerve-wracking.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They have that whole section about like what to say when they ask about problem solving, right? Because they're going to ask that.
Right. It's like a classic interview question.
Yeah.
But even if you've never worked in a hatchery before, they want to see how you think on your feet.
So what's your advice for someone going into that kind of interview? How do you even start answering a question like that?
Honestly, I think the biggest thing is don't freak out. They don't expect you to have, like, single-handedly saved a whole fish farm or anything. Just think about a time you had to solve a problem, any problem. Could be at school, at work, even just, like, figuring out why your houseplant was dying.
Right, right.
It's more about how you approach the problem.
So it's not just about like saying what you did, but how you figured it out.
Exactly. Did you
Yeah.
do any research? Did you ask someone for help? Those are all important steps.
And I think the RoleCatcher guide even mentioned that like using a specific structure can be helpful. Something like what was it called? The star method.
Yeah, the STAR method. It's super useful. It's basically like you describe the situation, the task you had to do, the action you took, and then the result. It helps you tell the story in a clear way.
Ah, that's right. And I guess that way, even if the result wasn't perfect, you can still show what you learned from it, right?
Exactly. It shows you're, like, always learning and growing, which is huge in any job.
This has been so fascinating. We've covered so much ground, from the day-to-day of an aquaculture hatchery worker to the future of sustainable seafood, and even some tips for anyone thinking about this as a career.
See, I told you it wasn't just about fish. It really makes you think about those everyday choices we make and the impact they have.
100%. All right, so next time you're at the grocery store looking at that sustainably farmed fish, take a second to think about all those folks working behind the scenes to make that happen.
The aquaculture hatchery workers, the unsung heroes of, well, dinner.
Absolutely. And hey, maybe this deep dive inspired you to try something new, whether it's a career change or just, learning more about the world around us.
Keep exploring. You never know what you might discover.
That's all the time we have for today. Until next time, happy diving.